And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Okay, look for west winds at 15 to 20 knots of the southern coast of the Panhandle tomorrow, and southeast to west winds 10 to 15 knots for the north coast. Lynn Canal, south winds at 15, 20 knots for Stevens Passage, and southwest at 15 for Clarence Strait. And then we've got small craft advisories all along the coastline here for Tuesday for the south coast, south at 25 knots, and the north coast, east-southeast 25 to 30 knots, southeast winds on the inside waters of 15 to 20 knots with seas running 3 to 4 feet. And for the Prince William Sound zone tomorrow, south wind at 15 knots, and south to southwest winds 15 knots for the North Gulf Coast with those seas right around 10 feet. Light variable winds in store for Cook Inlet, Kamishak Bay, and the Barren Islands. And then on Tuesday, look for an increase in those winds here for the North Gulf Coast. East-southeasterlies 25 knots, Prince William Sound, east winds picking up to 20 knots with 4-foot seas. And Cook Inlet, northeast winds 15 to 20 knots. And Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, southeast winds at 30 knots with seas building to 9 to 11 feet. Kodiak Island tomorrow and Shelikof Strait, winds will be variable at 10 knots, but southwest 20 knots there for the east side of the island, and for the Alaska Peninsula, east-southeast winds at 20 to 25 knots, and southeast at 15 for Bristol Bay. Kodiak Island on Tuesday, south to southeast winds 25 to 30 knots with seas up to 16 feet. And we've got gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula. South to southeast winds 30 to 40 knots, and southeast at 30 knots for Bristol Bay. For the eastern Aleutians tomorrow, east to northeast winds 25 to 30 knots, and for Adak and Atka, gale warnings, northeast winds up to 35 knots, and gale warnings also for the western Aleutians, winds right out of the north at 35 to 40 knots with those seas running around 20 feet. And then for the day on Tuesday, north winds, northerly gales for just about all the Aleutian chain, anywhere from 35 to 45 knots here all the way over toward Nikolsky, and then Unalaska Island, winds will be southwest at 30 knots with those seas up around 20 feet. And for the southwest coast, south of Nunivak Island tomorrow, northeast winds at 25 knots. Gale warnings for the Pribilof Islands, northeast winds 35 knots. Northeast at 40 for St. Matthew Island. Northerly winds 30 knots for the Yukon Delta coast. St. Lawrence Island, north at 25 for Norton Sound. Then we'll see these gales increase to storm force winds here for the Bering Sea from the St. George Island northward there to St. Matthew Island out of the north at 50 knots, and northeast winds 40 knots for the southwest coast here, and 45 knot northeast winds St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, northeast winds 40 knots. For the eastern Beaufort Sea coast tomorrow, not too bad. West winds 10 to 15 knots there, and north winds at 15 knots for the central and west coast. But for the Chukchi Sea, much windier conditions there with northerly winds at 25 to 35 knots and seas in whatever area is still ice-free, maybe as high as 6 feet. And then for Tuesday, eastern Beaufort Sea coast, west winds 15 to 20 knots, northwest at 10 knots for the central and west coast. And for the Chukchi Sea, north winds 20 to as high as 35 knots.